समझ नहीं आ रहा अपने सैलरी इंक्रीमेंट का क्या करूं।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है, अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एसआईपी का टॉपअप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
क्या समझ में नहीं आया।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है, अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एसआईपी टॉपअप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
अब समझा।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Geopolitics with Swasti, where Dr. Swasti Rao, our consulting editor for strategic and international affairs, takes your questions on geopolitics and India's position in the world right now. Swasti, we have a lot of questions. Lots has been happening in the world, especially India has come back into the focus. Our neighbors have come back into the focus. So first question is by Rima. She's asking, has Iran started mandating payments for oil in yuan?
Right. Now, it's an interesting question, of course, because from India's perspective and from the perspective of other countries in the world that obviously are getting affected and massively so by the disruption in almost 20% of global supply that used to come from the Strait of Hormuz.
Right.
Now, this is something that I think everybody is tracking. Indian media houses are tracking the world over. This is something which is being tracked. Now, quickly, Rima's question is very timely because indeed there has been news 2 days ago that the IRGC has already started to sort of start something called a toll booth, where what they're doing is that in lieu of some money, which is right now nobody knows the official figures, but yes, the figures that have been doing the rounds are like 2 million per vessel. So they are charging some money and allowing vessels of friendly countries to pass.
Right.
Now this has already started happening from the IRGC. Now we know there are many reports. However, if you look at the updates that were shared yesterday, yesterday we heard that now politically speaking as well, there has been a new draft which is going to be tabled in Majlis, which is Iran's parliament, which is going to sort of give it a kind of a legal political framework about how Iran can sort of levy a certain tax for vessels that are stranded there. And by the way, just to give you a number, a sense, there are about 2,000 vessels that have millions of barrels of oil on them loaded already that are stranded in the sea, not able to sort of pass the Strait of Hormuz on either side. And as you know, that the Strait of Hormuz is a very narrow choke point, so the problem is there. Now, as far as Saudi Arabia and UAE are concerned, that are actually enemy countries for Iran right now, they are already started to look for workarounds. So Saudi Arabia has done its own pipeline, east-west pipeline, and so is UAE. They are looking at a lot of workarounds. But this particular, so to say, development has come from Iran's to what Iran has called the friendly nations. And if you look at the list of the friendly nations, there are countries like India, China, Russia, Pakistan, Malaysia, and Egypt. So these are the countries that are there. Now, much of it is still not clear. We know that around after 15th of March to now, about 16 vessels have passed from the Strait of Hormuz with their AIS on. Now, AIS stands for Automatic Identification System. That, that because of which you can be tracked. And so a lot of agencies that are specializing in tracking the shipping data, they have tracked about 16 to 17 of these vessels. But then there is also news that about 8 of them have passed with their AIS off, which means that they are dark fleets or shadow fleets. Now, long and short, this is one part that yes, it is indeed true that something like this is in the offing. It is already happening. Nobody really knows the exact details apart from what the media houses have been reporting. That's one. Second, you asked the question about whether this is getting settled in yuan.
Right.
Now, it is true that from Iran's perspective, they have to get these payments because they are in this, a very difficult existential war. So from Iran's perspective, they need to, earn that money and perhaps get that money in a currency that they can use.
Right.
And definitely yuan makes the most sense in this particular regard. From India's perspective, of course, again, you know that it was perhaps reported that India paid in yuan, and then there was a rebuttal saying that India did not make any payments in yuan. But that's half the story, because if you get into the details, you see that even if India doesn't pay in yuan, let's say India pays in dirhams, and those dirhams have to be converted into yuan. So ultimately, it will be more yuanization of that
Right.
trade. And this is something which is, I would say, a pretty smart move by the Iranian regime to not just weaponize their sort of hold on the Strait of Hormuz, but also sort of economize it, right? To sort of encash it. And why not? Because all the rules have been flouted anyway. Now, this is what we know so far. So, willy or nilly, we are going to be paying in yuan, even though we have no reason to pay directly in yuan, because that is again something which is controversial in India. So, it doesn't matter whether we pay in dirhams. The dirhams are going to be converted, and the conversion fee, I think, will also be borne by Indian sort of buyers, because the middlemen are not going to they are going to in fact get their cuts. This is how it looks at the moment. Like I said, this is a situation fast evolving, but I do see that things are going in that direction. So by and large, you will see that the pressure on the Strait of Hormuz is going to be lessened, because of course one is this $2 million for per vessel, that way, so the friendly countries can get their vessels through that. And the second is the workarounds. So you will see that sooner than later you will see a more a kind of a more diversified kind of supply routes that will emerge. But for now, yes, we do see that this is in the making, and in a few days we'll come to know what really are the more exact contours and terms and conditions.
Right. So, Swasti, now we're talking about supply routes and we're focusing on India right now. So, the next question is by Sunil. He's asking, if Hormuz stays unreliable for a longer time, can India use Chabahar port for oil import? And in return, can India work on some food or medicine or essential goods exchange with Iran, which Iran, of course, will need a lot of, given how much Iran's economy has shrunk? So, where does India stand?
Now, as far as getting oil from this port of Chabahar is concerned, I do not know. We did not see it as of now. So I wouldn't jump the gun and say that it is likely to happen or not. I do see that India has been doubling down on sort of building more resilience in our own supply routes. We are buying from many other players. We're buying more from Venezuela, from Africa,
Right.
and so on. So we will see if that works out or not. So that's one part. About Chabahar, as you can see that India no longer has the stakes in Chabahar. If you look at the recent budget, it also clearly mentioned that we have no financial commitments to Chabahar. I think Chabahar and India's sort of, the stakes, the manner in which we had developed those stakes, I think those days are now no longer existing in the same frameworks. But as far as sending humanitarian aid is concerned, yes, I think we are already using the Chabahar port to send humanitarian aid in Iran. And I think that's a good strategy. India is known to be a humanitarian relief and disaster relief actor. India has done it for a host of countries. So why not? But as far as sort of creating more strategic leverage out of Chabahar, I'm not sure if we are going to see that right away.
Right. Swasti, so a lot of eyes right now are on strategy, a lot of geopolitical strategy that different countries are using, whether it's India, whether it's US, whether it's Israel, Iran, Russia, China. So our audience is obviously very interested in that. And the next question is by Yumi. And they're asking, US has used the escalate to de-escalate strategy before and it had worked, maybe partially, but this time it's not working at all. The biggest reason being credibility. In a situation where it's utterly unclear when and who will de-escalate, what should India do in the immediate post-war situation? And he says that you had mentioned in Russia-Ukraine war that India could have done much more in terms of humanitarian aid. Can we do it in Iran? After all, we have civilizational ties. Do you think this is a good balancing act?
Interesting question and a long question. There are several layers to that question. Let me begin with the easier part first. Escalate or de-escalate. Yes, the war is escalating. But also let me establish at the outset is that the part of the war that we saw unfolding so far in terms of the military campaign per se,
Right.
there is a military, there are two wars happening. One is a military campaign, the air bombing and the military campaign unleashed by United States and Israel, which has been largely successful because Iran's capabilities have been degraded. Numbers also do their own speaking. So if you look at the numbers, the number of launches, you do see that Iran's military capabilities have been degraded in an unprecedented manner. So that's the military campaign part of it. But Sabika, that's the easier part part of it. The more complicated part of it is definitely the economic war that now Iran is unleashing by way of weaponizing the Strait of Hormuz, by way of targeting the vulnerable energy infrastructure of the Gulf countries. And that is something for which is a hybrid sort of warfare, a gray zone warfare, an attritional warfare with a lot of cheap Shahid drones. And you realize that the GCC countries, even though they spent billions of dollars in very expensive aircrafts and other capabilities, do not really have that, that dollar for dollar sort of value when it comes to taking down those drones. So what they've been doing is that they've been using their very expensive missiles to take down very cheap drones, and that is a very unsustainable, so to say, situation. So you have a military campaign which is successful, and you have an economic warfare and the second order and the third order implications of danger to critical infrastructure, etc., which is a more dangerous part, because that is what also shows you how much the world is interconnected, right? So the military campaign is the easier part. That's one. Yes, America is going to escalate a little bit, even though we heard of some potential negotiators being, or some potential interlocutors being identified from the US side. And here, I mean, I wrote a column on that, and I mentioned Bagher Ghalibaf and Aragchi as being those two potential people that have been also now removed from the list of potential targets, which also means to show that at some point there will be some talks, but you don't know when that point will come. So those are the two ways in which we have to understand. In terms of the military campaign per se, I do see that America is going to escalate, because as we are talking, there was news of the American, the Marines, basically 3 battalions of them are likely to be deployed on the island of Karg or the island of Larak, which are basically in that close to that Strait of Hormuz, largely in an attempt to try and open the Strait of Hormuz forcibly. That is where time seems to be on Iran's side, because Iran, it is very easy for the IRGC to actually create a perception of, let's say, sea mines or anything. So basically, just some kind of a disruption, even though not real, but just the perception of it is enough to really keep all that oil and gas trade disrupted. So we will see that part also. I do not see it ending anytime soon, very soon. But like I said, that honestly, I think what I get intrigued about is that it is not America's war.
Right.
It is not America's war. Iran did not pose a direct threat to the United States of America. With the level at which the military campaign has now been done, nothing stops Mr. Donald Trump from announcing victory, military victory, and announcing some kind of finding an off-ramp and say that, we have done it and now we are going. Okay. The war has to be, the consequences of the war have to be faced by Israel and the GCC countries. So I do not have answer to the question of why America has gone to the extent of, going so far. And I do not have an answer of what is the larger political question that America is here trying to answer. Right. And when I get into the details of how America's veterans are looking at it, very interestingly, they mention about certain seductions that American presidents have always fallen prey to. And they said that there's one seduction of covert operations that never really remain covert, because another government comes and all the papers become declassified. Then there is another seduction, they say, of America's belief in its air power, and the fact that carpet bombing or extraordinary deployment of air power can actually bring the wars to an end. If you look at the recent examples, you don't really see that. And third is the seduction of a surgical strike.
Right.
Now, the surgical strike part has been rather successful in the case of Maduro, and perhaps that also somewhere encouraged Donald Trump to think that he's going to pull off something like this. I mean, this is, of course, all speculative, but long and short, it is something which is not concerning America directly, but the degree to which America has gotten involved is something that, is also creating its own problems. And so far, we saw the easier part. Now we will see the more complicated part. How do you create a perception of order and stability where your adversary has access to gray zone tactics and has also lost the fear of death? Right. That part is going to be more difficult. We will probably see more, coalition of the willings coming in, securing the Strait of Hormuz. So I think we will see that unfolding on the one hand. On the other hand, we will see more and more doubling down on workarounds.
Right.
Okay, because if you don't look at that, you don't really make sense of whatever is going to happen in the war. And definitely the regime stays, in my opinion, even though degraded and sort of weakened, but the regime will stay.
Right. There's another part of the question.
What should India do? Yeah, so quickly, I mean, In the Russia-Ukraine war, India did not have such direct stakes. I mean, considering just how entwined the world interests are, of course, you will always have some secondary or third, tertiary implications, okay, emanating out of a long-stretched war or an attritional war. But typically, India did not have direct stakes there, okay? We could afford to basically insulate ourselves and our country with whatever was happening. We also took a lot of decisions of buying the cheap Russian oil, etc. So whatever it was not really, it did not perpetuate an immediate crisis in India. Now, in this case, the situation is a bit different. As you can see that the LPG crisis here is really serious, and India's energy security is gravely affected. Now, in case of what India should do, of course, being a humanitarian actor is something that India has done always, right? So this is not something which is new. This is not some, uncharted waters that India has never really entered. This is a very familiar territory. India has always posited itself as a humanitarian actor. My reading of the Ukraine situation was that even though there is a massive humanitarian tragedy unfolding, we still do not see India sort of reinforcing the humanitarian help that India did until 2023, 2024. Okay. So that was just that part. In this part, I think, of course, India has to make sure that it doesn't get involved in other people's wars. I think the government initially, there was a pro-Israel tilt, but I think later on, I think in the later weeks, you have seen that India has tried to somewhere again course correct and sort of come to the center and say that fine, we have ties here, we have ties there. I think ultimately it is little doubt there that India's interests are more aligned with the GCC and Israel. But at least as far as this war is going on in this very active phase of bombing and killing and assassinations, it definitely doesn't make sense for India to get involved. And also, I think pitch itself as a humanitarian actor, maybe not as a mediator, because of course, like I said, I think there's a question on that as well about why Pakistan turned up as a host and a mediator. India doesn't really have direct stakes in that sense. So I think what India is doing is correct, but I think no part of the story is going to be completed if we do not look at how India should double down on its own domestic capabilities, right? I mean, that part, if you need a 5 million barrel of oil per day, and of that 5 million, if 88% is imported, then you will always be a kind of a victim to whatever happens in the world.
Right. Swasti, so the next question is on Pakistan being a mediator in the indirect talks, and that question is by Narendra Arya. He's asking, Pakistan is becoming a mediator in the USA-Iran war. Is Pakistan a rifle or the shoulder in the President Trump's scheme?
Okay, you have to understand that Pakistan has genuine stakes. Pakistan has genuine stakes because Pakistan has a security cooperation agreement with Saudi Arabia, which actually says that if Saudi Arabia is under attack, then Pakistan will come to help and Pakistan will extend its nuclear umbrella. Now, Pakistan has that. And on the other hand, Pakistan has a deep military cooperation with Iran. I don't know how many people in India know, I wrote it in my column, that for the longest time, this is not a development coming from 2020s, 2023, for the longest time, right from 70s, 80s, the Iranian Air Force pilots trained in Pakistan, right? Pakistan is also a country that sends its human resource to die in the Gulf. Pakistan is also somebody that sends trained pilots. For example, in Qatar, most of the Qatari Rafales are flown by Pakistani pilots. Long and short, you have to understand that Pakistan has been also playing all sides in the Gulf, particularly with the rich monarchies. It plays the Sunni card. With Iran, it plays the Shia card, because Pakistan, as you know, has both Shia and Sunni populations, etc. So for Pakistan, it simply has more stakes. And why it sort of projected itself or offered itself as a viable place to mediate was also because Pakistan does not want to invoke the defense cooperation terms and conditions that they struck with Saudi Arabia, because that would pitch them completely against Iran, and they don't want that, okay? So it only made sense for Pakistan to do that. That's one. And second, because Pakistan has always punched above its weight. Pakistan has been very quick, not just in this kind of a diplomatic game. As you can see, Pakistan is also a part of the Gaza Peace Board, etc., to sort of please Donald Trump. Pakistan has also always been this revolving door between China, Turkey, Caucasus, and the Middle East. So Pakistan does a lot of things which we find quite incredible, because Pakistan's economy isn't really proportional to kind of the aspirations that it seems to have. But it is true that Pakistan has more stakes, and Pakistan has always punched above its weight. The third thing is that from Iran's perspective, I have to mention that the only two credible places where they could have agreed to meeting, even if not directly, but at least going to a place to speak to the Americans, let's say mediated by somebody, was either Islamabad, which is Pakistan, or Armenia, because Armenia is also an important partner to Iran, and Iran. I mean, Armenia could have been the other, and also because Armenia and Iran share a border.
Right.
Okay, Armenia could have been the other place. But now there is a question on that, so I don't want to overstep and answer that question in advance. But I don't think Armenia had the stakes that Pakistan had. And currently, with whatever is happening in Armenia, it makes more sense for them to stay out.
Right.
And then therefore, Pakistan sort of, stepped in. Now, it is also true that it has happened. Both Ghalibaf and Araghchi both went to Islamabad. At least there are reports. We haven't seen any pictures or any photo ops, obviously, because even Ghalibaf has declined speaking to the Americans directly. But the 5 points have been relayed by someone to the American side, and the American 15 points have also been relayed to Iran by someone. So, I mean, that mediator,
Right.
that host out there is Pakistan, just because it just makes sense for Pakistan, right? Now, who is shooting a rifle and who's letting itself be used? Like I said, that you have to read between the lines of why did I say that Pakistan sort of punches above its weight. Yeah.
Right. Swasti, so we're talking about different actors in this entire equation that has come up. And the next question is by Rima. They're asking, has China delivered advanced electronic warfare systems that can blind US carriers to Iran?
Now, ever since the first 12-day war happened, right, I have gone on record writing several times, not just in my columns and pieces, but also in my different posts across social media, that the second round is coming, and the second round will have more Chinese participation. Now, there was a reason I was saying that all the while, because that was a consistent feedback that I got from many sources and many experts across the region. And now that you have seen the second round unfold in the manner that it has done, you do hear that the Chinese air defenses had come. Although the Chinese air defenses, the HQ-9 didn't work as much, and of course we have discussed it a lot also for the print, across different shows like Worldview, etc. So they did not work. As far as China sending these EW capabilities, yes, there are reports that China has sent these EW capabilities. Also remember that Iran has stopped using the Western GPS system. Iran is now using the Baidu. All right, so that sort of makes it more seamless. Has it worked? I mean, considering the complete air superiority that US Air Force and Israeli Air Force has on Iranian skies, it definitely goes on to show that it has not worked. But you have to then understand that's not what China is interested in. China is more interested in sort of getting battle time data, real time data of how the Western systems perform in order to improve their own capabilities. Okay, so these are often degraded versions of the real weapons that China uses, and China uses these battles, let's say directly or indirectly. In the case of Iran, it has become more direct. Nobody expected it to become direct, but like I said, that China would have played a larger role anyway, directly or indirectly, but via proxies or whatever. But also about the Chinese drones being battle testers by against Houthis in Sudan, etc. Also, the PL-15 case that we saw in Op Sindoor. Now, all of these basically show that China is interested in getting that real-time data. That is also one of the major quid pro quos, by the way, in why China is supporting Russia against Ukraine in the West, because it sort of creates that feedback loop for the Chinese weapons. Because remember, China has never fought a direct war with the United States. And that is the war that China is somewhere preparing for. So I think that is what explains it. And do they have the capabilities? I told you they have sent, but they have not worked as much. Will they do it again? Yes, the Chinese will do it again. Hopefully not so directly. That's not China's calculus. But indirectly, yes, they've been doing it already. So we will see that.
So the next question is by Anubhav Saxena. He's asking, if Iranian regime falls, what impact will it have on Armenia, and how will India then carry on defense transactions to Armenia since it passes through Iran? Is Armenia providing any material or social help to Iran in this time?
Very interesting question. That's the beauty of geopolitics, because it sort of takes you to places that otherwise you wouldn't really bother to look into, and interconnections that you wouldn't really bother to analyze. Now, with Armenia, two things. The background to this question is that India emerged as the topmost defense supplier to Armenia around 2023, 2024. Why? Because Armenia had been in a long-standing war with its neighbor Azerbaijan over a region called Nagorno-Karabakh. And in that war, I mean, Armenia had been decisively defeated. I mean, the conflict goes longer back in 90s, but cutting a long story short and coming to modern times, in 2020 there was a war and Armenia lost it quite decisively, and then again in 2023 they lost, and so it's been like that. And what made India step into that place was the fact that Armenia was a CSTO ally, which is Russia's NATO, the Collective Security Treaty Organization, and Azerbaijan wasn't. And even though Armenia expected Russia, their treaty ally and security guarantor, to step in and do something for Armenia, Russia had a policy of playing both sides. And there was a time in 2022, 23, around 2022 or so, when Russia emerged as the topmost defense supplier to both Armenia and Azerbaijan, right? So this was also a reason why Armenia was quite disgruntled, and that was a space where India stepped in when Armenia was looking at emergency procurements, cheaper weapons, because it's not a big economy, and Indian weapons that were quite good but not as expensive as the Western ones, and not Russian either, sort of filled that gap. And that's how we started sending the Pinakas and the Akash air defenses and the Swati Rao radars and the ATAGs and all that stuff. Now, quickly, what happened in 2025 August was that Armenia and Azerbaijan had a normalization, which was steered on the face of it by Mr. Donald Trump, but from the back door by Turkey. After the normalization, Armenia doesn't really have the same kind of an emergency requirement to go in for these quick procurements, and therefore we have not seen new orders being coming from Armenia. And so this particular normalization also resulted in something interesting, Sapika, which is that Trump went there and created something called a Trump corridor. And if you look at the region where this Trump corridor is, it is in a province called Sunik, and it is exactly on the Armenia-Iran border.
Right.
The same place from where we used to send our shipments to Armenia. So it is a problem, right? So what do you do? My reading of the situation was, and I have written it in my closed-door assessments also, to the MOD, etc., that India should develop stakes in Armenia's peace as well. I mean, India should be developing Armenia's resilience. So we were almost for 2 years, 1.5 years, Armenia's topmost defense supplier. We should have done some kind of established some kind of joint ventures in Armenia, so that if this situation or this kind of a situation arrived, we had a plan B. As of now, I am not aware of any joint venture being set up between Indian and Armenian firms. We were shipping it constantly from the Iran border. Now, with that becoming the Trump border, so it's called the TRIP corridor. On the screen you can read what it stands for. But it's basically, it is a connectivity corridor, and it is talking about how America can play a role in bringing investments, etc. It's normalization. Why this is not all faff is because in February this year, 2026, Mr. J.D. Vance, along with his wife, Usha Vance, paid a visit to that place and again pledged billions of dollars of investments, which means that America is serious. And from America's own domestic political calculus, the fact that Mr. Trump has not been able to bring real wars to an end, and Armenia-Azerbaijan normalization is an important feather in his cap, which he will always try to sell to his base. So therefore, the two so-called successful interventions that America has had has been Armenia-Azerbaijan normalization and Venezuela. Okay, otherwise everything else is like a bigger mess than it really was when he started out. So yes, it creates a problem for India. We have not seen new orders. And I also did not see a kind of a recalibration of India's strategy towards Armenia, where we had a reputational advantage. Like I said, Armenia and the EU, and Armenia's tilt towards the West is, I think, quite unmistakable. Nobody that really knows the Caucasus can argue that Russia has the same standing there because of its long-standing preoccupation in Ukraine. Both Azerbaijan, now, by the way, Azerbaijan has emerged as one of the major hubs for gas, to the EU now. It's also there are also a lot of reserves in the Caspian Sea, so they are going to be exploiting that. Particularly with regard to Armenia, Armenia has already formally applied for membership in the EU, and the first ever Armenia-EU summit is going to happen in, I think, the first week of May in Yerevan. And if you look at the agenda of that summit, it's the first ever, it's quite historic. It's quite a 360-degree thing. I mean, it's about bringing investments in Armenia. EU is already the topmost donor, developmental partner to Armenia. Long and short, the point that I'm trying to make here is that Armenia's ground realities have changed. There was a certain context in which India emerged as a major defense supplier. I think we had a good enough window to also establish stakes, not just in Armenia's war, but also in Armenia's peace. Did we do the latter? I don't think so.
Right.
And that's the whole point of geopolitics, which is that, international relations and international, the manner in which it goes forward, there are no permanent friends and enemies. There are interests. So you have to really gauge how far is your partner's interest changing for you to enable sort of a recalibration that is required. So I don't see that happening. And the question that you asked is the answer to that is that no, we don't really see much action happening there. There is a second part also to that question, which also will help you understand why this is so complex. Now, India, Armenia, and Iran had a trilateral framework. Okay. The reason being, and why was India interested in that? And that was always our plan B. So weapons supplies was plan A. This is plan B. Why do I call it plan B? This is plan B because you know that we had investments in Chabahar. You also know that we were also very serious about, we still formally there, the INSTC, which is another kind of a connectivity corridor that starts from India, enters Iran, goes all the way, crosses Central Asia and then goes to Azerbaijan and then to Moscow. Azerbaijan, So what India was doing, that India, in order to sort of leverage the India-Iran-Armenia trilateral, India was doing two things, okay? One was that India was trying to link its stakes in Chabahar with a rail link or some kind of a, transport corridor, whatever, to the ongoing INSTC, right? That was one part. So this was one planning which was pretty much in place, and had things been normal by now, we would have seen that Chabahar would have gotten connected to INSTC in Iran. The second leg of that part was we were trying, because in its current form, INSTC was going via Baku, which is Azerbaijan, and not via Armenia. So the second leg of that addition, or that tributary, so what we were trying was that we were trying to bring Armenia into INSTC by creating another link between Armenia and Azerbaijan. Right. Now, rest things being equal, it was a great idea. It would have given Armenia and Azerbaijan sort of a kind of a diversification, opportunity, a kind of a, building resilience, building complementarity. But under prevailing circumstances, Armenia doesn't have any reasons to do this either, because now they are being quoted by Europeans and Turkey and France and Germany. Right. So suddenly you have, powers with more latitude for investments, better defense and everything. So I think at a later stage, we will still see something of this sort coming back, but right now, no. And whether or not the regime in Iran stays, okay, my opinion, it will stay, even though it will be significantly weakened. Even if it stays or it doesn't stay, it still doesn't help India's cause here, because whatever we'll see will be either more inward looking with lesser sort of potential to really pursue these international partnerships. And second, I'm not sure to what extent will they be then pliable with the US interests, and how interested would the US then be in order to let INSTC running, because it has a Russian angle there too. So long and short, yes, it has been a setback.
Right. So Swasti, the next question is the most pertinent one, which is by Jim, and he's asking, how could war in Iran end?
Well, I wish I had the confidence to really answer it with some clarity, but I think the situation on the ground is very fuzzy, and I have to say that we all have to be humble in sort of making these predictions. But there are certain things that I can say with a fair amount of confidence. One is that the regime stays. Right. If you do not understand what kind of a capacity does the Iranian regime and the Iranian state has, to be bombed, then that means that you have not studied the 1980 to 1988 Iran-Iraq war. That's one. So that's why the regime stays. And after 1988, especially after the war ended, remember the Iran-Iraq war is longer in duration than both of the world wars, right? World War I, World War II, both. And it stayed. So you have to understand you're dealing with a theological, a kind of an apocalyptic sort of a regime which is sort of running on very high sentiments of religion, of ideology. It's very, very difficult to actually, and the manner in which they have decentralized, which is called the mosaic, they're existing in a state of, that decentralized mosaic. I don't think the regime goes. The regime can be significantly weakened. There could be a regime change. Yes, theoretically, yes, of course, if there are multiple axes of internal destabilizations happening simultaneously, right? Multiple axes happening simultaneously. Do you see the Kurds, the Baloch, the Azeris, and the people of Iran coming together to overthrow the regime? Iran is a land of revolution, so theoretically the possibility is there. But then you will not be able to find the correct equilibrium where Kurds and Baloch and Azeris all have the same kind of a grudge or some kind of a motive or the same kind of weaponization for that matter, same kind of militarization in order to overthrow the regime. So my reading is the regime is going to stay, even though significantly weakened. I already gave you the numerics of how the military campaign has been very successful. So that's one part. The regime states, but definitely significantly weakened. The access of proxies significantly weakened. There is also a lot of pushback from the countries in the Gulf, particularly like, for example, if you see Lebanon, that has the Hezbollah. So you keep seeing these videos of how people of Lebanon are now turning out Hezbollah families, etc., because they say that you being here is bringing destruction to us. What do we have to do with you? So you will see the access of proxies also fairly sort of weakened. But then what you will perhaps also see Donald Trump losing the midterms, because it is something that is completely against his MAGA rhetoric, completely against his focus on the Western Hemisphere, etc. So we will see perhaps Donald Trump losing the midterms. I'm quite confident of that, actually. The regime staying, but significantly weakened, internal, inward looking, and we will also see a lot of workarounds, so to lessen dependence on the Strait of Hormuz. And fourth, and very important, is that for the GCC, I see the GCC never wanted to get involved in this war. In fact, they created their safe havens and created stakes with everybody in the region so that they wanted to be out of this violence. Okay, but now the war has come to them. It is their war now, and even though they will not try to do the same kind of military actions like Israel is capable of doing, but frankly, I do see that all these countries, including Israel, are going to double down on the one hand of getting more equipment from America, because they still want America on their side, even though the security assurances and the guarantees have not worked. Okay, and on the other hand, definitely a lot of money, billions and billions of dollars being poured into low-cost interceptors. There is a reason why Zelensky today is in Saudi Arabia. And 4 delegations from the Gulf, Kuwait, UAE, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar were in Ukraine on the 3rd day, 4th day of when the war started. So there is a reason why. So low-cost interceptors, so that you're able to get a match between offensive and defensive capabilities, right? Not getting caught in a situation where it's very easy for your adversary to bleed you and you cannot strike back because just how expensive your weapons are. So we will see these 4 larger trends.
Swasti, the next question is on the worsening fuel crisis all over the world, and this question is by Senapati. They're asking, with the worsening fuel crisis, why hasn't Cuba, as Donald Trump likes to put it, capitulated? And has India's pragmatic approach towards Venezuela paid off in any form?
Interesting question. Okay, very quickly. I see Cuba being the next target for Donald Trump, not only because he has not been able to get a quick victory in Iran, but also because it's sort of the line between victory and defeat is also getting very blurred. So I mean, Iran can claim victory, US can claim victory. So it's, what I'm saying? So the line that divides victory from defeat is getting more and more blurry, right? In this situation, it is going to become somewhere imperative that Donald Trump then shows the might of American military by doing a second Maduro on Cuba. He has already gone to, I would say, huge extents to cut off Cuban regime's supply of oil from Venezuela. Venezuela is no longer sending any oil to Cuba. He's also done a lot of blockades, a lot of vessels that were coming. They were always stopped. Also from Mexico. Okay, so there is a crippling energy crisis, food crisis, humanitarian crisis in Cuba. There are days when people are without electricity the whole day. But then again, you have to understand that Cuba, for Donald Trump, is going to be a legacy issue, because right after the Fidel Castro sort of revolution, I mean, no American president has been able to do anything about the Cuban regime. No American president could do anything about the Venezuelan regime either. And that is what makes Donald Trump so confident that he can really do something that extraordinary, right, that he did in Venezuela, he can repeat that in Cuba. What is happening? Okay, so I keep hearing a lot of discussion on how the Miguel regime, the president, has shown kind of an interest of speaking to Donald Trump. Long and short, I mean, there is no which way that if Donald Trump tries to do an operation like a midnight hammer, let's say, which was what he called for the Delta operation, the American forces, the Delta operation for Venezuela, that would probably be an option, because not only for Donald Trump it's a legacy issue, but for Marco Rubio, somebody who's very, very important right now in the administration. It's a personal issue. He is born to Cuban immigrants who left the country because of the revolution. And the other thing is that it is a country which is basically a narco mafia state. Okay, very poor economy, crippling economic crisis, not because of America's blockade, but also because of long-standing sanctions. By the way, you should know that Cuba and Iran, these are also the interconnected theaters. So a lot of Hezbollah fighters had training camps in Cuba. Okay, I've written about it myself, which also shows just how interconnected, these theaters are. So, and the final factor why I see Cuba is going to be easy for Donald Trump whenever he decides to do it, my guess is soon, because both Russia and China do not really have stakes to come and support the Cuban regime like they did not do in the case of Venezuela.
Right. So Swasti, that brings us to the last question of this episode, which is by Tanusu. So they're asking that election is coming up next month in Hungary. What are the chances of Viktor Orban winning again? Also, if he loses, what would it mean to EU? Does the leadership change in Hungary affect India in any way?
So Tanuso is one of our viewers who always asks us questions that are taking us to other different theaters, and I always appreciate Tanuso you for that. Hungary, yes. Viktor Orban has been in power for almost 16 years. Viktor Orban is a far-right leader of a party called Fidesz, and Viktor Orban is extremely unpopular right now because under Viktor Orban years, Hungary has become the black sheep of the EU. It is the poorest country in the EU, right? And just next to Hungary is Poland, which is EU's fastest growing economy, a recent entrant into the trillion club, GDP economies, and also now a member of the G20, perhaps. Right. Okay, so the contrast also makes it even worse for Viktor Orban's image. Viktor Orban has had several problems. Don't think that Viktor Orban started to have problems with the European Union and Brussels because of Russia-Ukraine war and because of his relationship with China and Putin. No. Viktor Orban started having problems with the EU much before the Russia-Ukraine war, because under his years, they took unprecedented steps to curtail all kinds of media freedom, judicial, they did a lot of, changes in the judicial system. They bought the judges, they bought the media. They did not want to sign up for the EU corruption bodies, like anti-corruption bodies. So if you're a part of the EU, you have to be also signatory to the EU watchdogs on anti-corruption. So he said, no way in my, times, etc. So basically, long and short, because of several reasons, and much before the Russia-Ukraine war started, the EU had withheld these COVID funds that Hungary was supposed to get as a member of the EU. So a lot of money, actually, something like $30-40 billion, euros, okay, they withheld. They said, no, you have to do these reforms. Back then, it was a similar situation in Poland, but Poland made the successive reforms and therefore got all the money. They did not do it in Hungary because Viktor Orban had a very different rhetoric. Then the Russia-Ukraine war started, and then, it became almost a perfect alibi for Orban to go on with this anti-Brussels rhetoric by saying that I do not agree with Europe's policies on Russia and Ukraine, which is one factor, but that's not the reason why he's having problems with Europeans, right? The problem is much deeper because he's not willing to change. One. Quickly, what has happened is that there is another guy called Peter Magyar, who was earlier very much with Orban, but he created his own party. He said that I'm disillusioned with all the corruption and everything. And as of now, all polls show, and any poll that you can still call an independent poll, because then there are polls which are very closely affiliated to the national TV, which are not which are very pro-Orban, because I just told you that there were the free media doesn't exist in Hungary, etc., etc. Now, back to what I'm trying to tell you is that if you look at the polls, about 58% voters actually say that they are going to be voting for Magyar. Only 35% say they are going to be voting for Orban, right? So that's a very comfortable sort of margin. And if you see in the case of Magyar, the percentage of his approval or the percentage of his support has been growing. So every month there are polls and his percentage points increase. So from 50% it got to 53%, it got to 58%, etc. In the case of Fidesz and Orban, it's stuck at 35%, okay? And that is the reason why everybody is saying that perhaps the era of Orban is coming to an end. What happens if it changes? Okay, now please remember, Peter Magyar is also a right-wing, candidate. So their policies on immigration, which is very anti-immigration, is going to continue. But what will change is that Magyar has already said that my problem is that I see rampant corruption, and which is true. I mean, that there's a reason it's the poorest country, it's the most corrupt country in the EU. So I want to, unleash a fight against corruption. I want to have more pragmatic relations with, our partners. I want the funds to come. I want to bring back media freedom. I want to make the judiciary more independent. And finally, I also want to join that anti-corruption watchdog, because in the 16 years under Orban, this has gone to the dogs, basically. And you see that a lot of younger voters really support, Peter Magyar. And that's why Viktor Orban for the first time is really unsure. Because the last 3-4 elections that he won by a landslide.
Right.
And this is the time when the situation is radically different. In fact, so much so that he put together a kind of a rally recently with all the far-right leaders in Europe. So Marine Le Pen from France and Geert Wilders from the Netherlands and also from Spain. Only 2,000 people turned up, to watch it and to watch the proceedings. So going by the polls, it shows it'll change. But let's see, okay. He's also endorsed by Donald Trump and Vance. Okay. Yeah, he's also endorsed by them. About India, because there's a related part on India. About India, quickly, see, Hungary is not an important trading partner to us. The total bilateral trade is $1.3, $1.4 billion only. Compare that with our trade with Poland. I mean, it's, again, like I said, that there's a way, lot of difference. I see with Magyar coming because probably there'll be, better measures to tackle corruption. There'll be better measures to sort of make use of the COVID funds, which are sort of held up because of all these problems. We'll see, by and large, a betterment of the Hungarian economy, and perhaps that will open also windows for India. So I only see if, Magyar comes, it will be better for India. I mean, trade-wise, it will be better for India, yeah.
Swasti, that brings us to the end of this episode. This has
Thank
been
you.
such an enlightening conversation. Thank you for your questions that took us to so many parts of the world. We'll be back with you next week with another Geopolitics with Swasti.